My name is Marlo Ashford. I was 28 when everything changed on a night that smelled like cinnamon and pine. I remember the ornament first, a small glass bird, chipped at the wing, that my daughter Wren had hung too low on the tree, right where anyone walking past might knock it loose. I kept meaning to move it higher. I never did. Some part of me liked that it hung crooked, imperfect, exactly where a 6-year-old's hands had placed it. We were at my mother-in-law's house that night, the Ashford house, with its tall windows and taller expectations. Eleanor Ashford ran her home the way she'd run her husband's company before he passed, with precision, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and with a low hum of judgment beneath every kind word. I had learned, over 4 years of marriage to her son Theo, to read that hum the way sailors read weather. That Christmas Eve, the hum had turned into something else. A storm I hadn't seen coming. It started small. A comment about the way I'd dressed Wren. A bit plain for a family photo, don't you think? Then a comment about the store-bought pie I'd brought, set beside Eleanor's homemade one like an accusation. I let it pass. I always let it pass. I had learned that silence was armor in that house, that arguing only sharpened Eleanor's tongue further. But then came the letter. I don't know how she found it. Tucked in my coat pocket, a letter from my late father, the only handwriting I had left of his, the one where he told me he was proud of the woman I'd become despite everything we'd been through. I had brought it with me that night for no reason I could explain except that it was Christmas, and grief has strange timing. Eleanor held it up in front of the whole family. Read a line aloud, the wrong line, the private line, and asked, in that voice that could cut glass, whether I made a habit of airing family shame at holiday dinners. I don't remember standing. I remember only Theo's hand not moving to stop her, and the silence of the room pressing into my ears like water. And then her hand moved, fast, sharp, across my cheek, and the room went white at the edges. "Take your daughter and leave," she said. "You don't belong in this family." I did not cry. I want that understood, clearly, from the very first page of the story. I did not cry in that room. I picked up my daughter's coat. I picked up the little glass bird from the tree, because Wren would have wanted it, and I walked out into the cold without looking back at my husband's face. I only cried in the car, once Wren was asleep in her booster seat, once the porch light of that house was a small gold coin shrinking in my rear-view mirror. I did not know, driving away, that within hours it would be Eleanor Ashford who broke down, not me. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what I carried in my chest for 4 years before that slap ever landed. I met Theo Ashford at a gallery opening downtown, back when I was 24 and still believed love could be uncomplicated. He was gentle in a way that surprised me. A man raised by a mother like Eleanor should have been armored, calculating, but Theo had somehow kept something soft in him. I used to think it was a miracle. Later I understood it was a wound, disguised as gentleness, a boy who had learned early that the safest place to stand was directly behind his mother's opinions. Eleanor never liked me. Not from the first dinner, when she asked what my father did for a living in a tone that made it clear she already suspected the answer wasn't impressive enough. My father drove trucks for 30 years and raised me alone after my mother left. He was the finest man I ever knew. Eleanor decided, within the hour, that I was beneath her son. I stayed anyway, not out of naivety, out of love, and later, out of Wren. There were years of small cruelties before the big one. The birthday cards addressed only to Theo. The Christmas gifts for Wren that were slightly nicer than the ones for the other grandchildren, a phrase Eleanor used about my daughter more than once, as though Wren belonged to a separate, lesser category of family. The comments about my job, I managed the accounts for a mid-sized architecture firm, work I was good at, work that paid our mortgage, delivered always with a faint, theatrical pity. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Theo would eventually see it, eventually stand between his mother and his wife the way a husband should. I waited for that moment the way you wait for a kettle you're not sure is even on the stove. What I didn't know, what I would only learn in the weeks following that Christmas, was that Eleanor's cruelty toward me had never really been about me at all. It was about a secret so carefully buried that she would rather shatter her own family than let it surface. I found the first thread of it 3 days after Christmas, going through a box of Theo's late father's old papers that Eleanor had, in her fury, shoved at me the week before as something to take with you since you clearly don't want anything else from this family. Inside was a photograph I had never been meant to see. The photograph was old, its edges soft with handling, a woman standing outside a hospital I didn't recognize, holding an infant wrapped in a blue blanket. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written a date, 11 years before Theo was born, and a single name. Not Eleanor's name. I sat on the floor of my small apartment, ran asleep down the hall, and stared at that photograph for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. A child. A child who existed before Theo, who was never mentioned, who did not appear in a single Ashford family portrait, a single holiday card, a single conversation in 4 years of marriage. I am not a woman who goes looking for other people's ghosts. I want to be honest about that because this is not a story about digging up buried things out of spite. I found the photograph by accident, the way truth so often arrives, sideways, uninvited, in a box you weren't even supposed to keep. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And something in me, something that had spent 4 years absorbing Eleanor Ashford's contempt without understanding its source, needed, quietly and without cruelty, to understand. I didn't confront anyone.
Not yet.
I am, by nature, patient. My father used to say I had still water in me, the kind that looks calm on the surface and runs deep underneath. Instead, I made a single phone call to an old friend from college who now worked at the county records office, and I asked her carefully what she could find about a name and a date. It took her 4 days to call back. What she told me rearranged everything I thought I understood about the woman who had slapped me on Christmas Eve and called my daughter unworthy of her family's name. Eleanor Ashford had a daughter. Born when Eleanor was 19, unmarried, given up for adoption within a week of birth, and never spoken of again. Not to her husband, not to Theo, not to a single person in the family I had married into. A daughter Eleanor had erased so completely that even her own son didn't know she existed. And here I was, a woman she'd called unworthy, a mother she'd humiliated in front of everyone she loved, holding the one piece of paper that could unmake the entire fortress of superiority Eleanor Ashford had spent 60 years building around herself. I did not feel triumphant. I felt, more than anything, a strange and unexpected sadness for her. Theo called me 11 times in the 3 days after Christmas. I let most of them go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, but because I needed the silence to think clearly, and Theo's voice, gentle as it was, had a way of pulling me back into old patterns of forgiveness before I'd even decided whether forgiveness was warranted this time. When I finally answered, on the 4th day, his voice cracked on the other end. "She had no right," he said. "I should have said something. I've been a coward for 4 years, and I know it." I believed him. That's the strange, unglamorous truth about betrayal inside a marriage. It rarely comes from cruelty, more often from a spinelessness so gradual you almost don't notice you've been standing alone in a room full of people who love you. I told him I needed time. I did not tell him about the photograph. Not because I wanted to punish him with the secret, though I understand if that's what it looks like from the outside, but because some truths need to be handled the way you'd carry water in cupped hands, slowly, carefully, without spilling before you reach the person who needs it most. Instead, I drove to see Eleanor alone. She opened the door already defensive, already armed with the same practiced disdain she'd worn like perfume for 4 years. "Come to apologize for the scene you caused?" she said. I didn't raise my voice. I want that remembered clearly. I never raised my voice, not once, in everything that followed. "I came to return something," I said, and placed the photograph gently on her hallway table, face up, the way you'd set down something fragile. I watched the color leave Eleanor Ashford's face in real time. Watched 60 years of carefully maintained composure crack down the middle like ice under sudden weight. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a woman realizing the floor beneath her was no longer solid. "In a box you gave me," I said. "The one you said held nothing you wanted." I did not tell her I knew the name. I let her tell me herself. Because some truths only mean something when a person chooses, finally, to say them aloud rather than have them dragged from her. Eleanor sat down heavily on the bottom stair of that grand staircase I'd once found so intimidating, and for the first time in 4 years, I saw her not as an obstacle or an adversary, but as an old woman carrying a weight she'd never once set down. Her name was Iris, Eleanor said. I was 19. My parents said if I kept her, I'd have nothing, no husband, no future, no place in this family. So I let them take her. I told myself it was the responsible thing, the respectable thing. Her hands, folded in her lap, were shaking. I built this whole life, this house, Theo's father's company, everything, like it could fill the shape she left behind. And it never did. Not for one single day in 40 years. I understood, sitting there in that cold hallway, why Eleanor Ashford had never once looked at me with warmth. I wasn't simply beneath her son, as I'd always assumed. I was a mirror. A young woman, a mother, someone who had kept her child when Eleanor had been forced, or had chosen, the line between those two things blurred by decades of guilt, to give hers away. Every time she looked at me holding Ren, she was looking at the life she never let herself have. Her cruelty toward me, I understood then, had never truly been about me at all. That did not excuse the slap. That did not excuse the years of small humiliations, the letter read aloud in front of a room, the words "you don't belong" in this family spoken to a mother holding her daughter's coat. Understanding where cruelty comes from is not the same as forgiving it, and I want to be honest that I have never pretended otherwise, to myself or to anyone since. But I no longer needed revenge to feel whole. What I needed, what I had always needed if I was honest, was simply for the truth to stand in the light where everyone could finally see it. "Does Theo know?" I asked quietly. Eleanor shook her head, and for the first time in 4 years, Eleanor Ashford wept in front of me. Not the performed tears I'd occasionally seen at family funerals, but something older, rawer, 40 years overdue. I want to be clear about something because this is the part of the story where a different kind of narrator might have chosen a different kind of ending. I could have told Theo everything that same night, with the sharp satisfaction of a woman finally armed with a weapon equal to the wounds she'd received. I could have gathered the family, the aunts, the cousins, everyone who had watched Eleanor humiliate me over a store-bought pie and a private letter, and let the truth detonate in front of all of them the way my father's letter had been detonated in front of me. I thought about it. I won't pretend I didn't. There is a particular human satisfaction in the idea of being finally, publicly vindicated. But I kept thinking of that photograph, a 19-year-old girl standing outside a hospital, alone, having just done the hardest thing a person can do, and then spending 40 years pretending it never happened because the alternative was unbearable. I thought about Ren, asleep in her booster seat as I drove away from that house, and how I never wanted my daughter's story to be one where love was something you weaponized against people once you finally had the power to. So I chose something quieter. I told Eleanor she needed to tell Theo herself. Not because I wanted to protect her from consequence. She deserved to face what she'd hidden, but because some truths, delivered secondhand, only calcify into new resentments. If Eleanor wanted any chance of repairing what she'd spent 40 years breaking, it had to come from her own mouth, in her own voice, without me standing behind it as either weapon or shield. And Ren, I added, will never again be spoken to the way you spoke to her mother on Christmas Eve. That is not a request, Eleanor. That is the only condition under which any of us come back into this house. She nodded. It was the first time in 4 years I had seen her agree to anything without an edge of condescension underneath it. Theo sat across from his mother 3 days later while I stayed home with Ren, deliberately absent, because this was a reckoning that belonged to the two of them and not to me. He came to my apartment afterward pale, hollowed out, the way a person looks after learning their whole childhood had a room in it they were never allowed to enter. His mother had told him everything. About Iris, about the years of silence, about the way her own buried grief had curdled into the coldness she'd shown me since the day we met. She said she saw you and hated herself, Theo told me, sitting at my small kitchen table, Ren's crayon drawings taped crookedly to the fridge behind him. Not you. Herself. She said watching you love Ren the way you do was like watching a life she gave away. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, the last of the Christmas lights on our street were still glowing, tangled in bare branches, stubborn against the cold. I should have protected you a long time ago, Theo said. Not just on Christmas. Years ago. I let her cruelty become the weather in our marriage, and I told myself that was easier than confronting her. That wasn't fair to you. It was never fair to Ren. I believed him. Not blindly. Not the way I once might have, but in the clear-eyed way you believe someone who has finally, painfully, told you the truth about their own failures instead of asking you to carry the weight of understanding them alone. I'm not asking you to forgive her, Theo added. I'm asking whether there's any way back for us. For you and me. I looked at the little glass bird, chipped at the wing, that I'd set on my windowsill since Christmas Eve. I thought about the years of small silences I'd swallowed to keep a fragile peace, and how peace built on silence isn't really peace at all, just a debt quietly accumulating interest. There's a way back, I told him, but it starts with you finding your spine before you find your mother's forgiveness. It has been almost a year now since that Christmas Eve. Eleanor Ashford is a different woman than the one who slapped me in front of her family, not transformed into someone warm and easy, because 40 years of buried grief doesn't dissolve in a single reckoning, but softened at the edges in a way I never expected to witness. She found Iris 8 months ago, through a record search Eleanor made herself, without my help, because I told her that this was one truth she needed to chase down with her own 2 hands. Iris is 51 now, a schoolteacher in another state, married with grown children of her own. They have spoken 4 times since. Eleanor tells me it is the hardest and most necessary work she has ever done. She has never touched me again, and she never will. But last month, at Ren's 7th birthday, I watched Eleanor kneel down, slowly, her knees no longer what they used to be, to help my daughter blow out candles, and she said, quietly, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. You belong exactly where you are." And she looked at me over Ren's head, not with contempt this time, but with something that might, eventually, become respect. Theo and I are still together, though not because I ever needed forgiveness to feel whole. We are together because he chose, finally and consistently, to stand where a husband should stand, not behind his mother's opinions, but beside his family. Trust is not something you restore with a single apology. It is something you rebuild the way you'd rebuild a house after storm, board by board, testing each one before you put your weight on it. I kept the letter from my father. I keep it somewhere safer now. And the little glass bird still hangs crooked on our tree every December, exactly where Ren first placed it, a small, imperfect thing that survived a night I once thought might break us completely. Some nights I think about that hallway, about Eleanor crumbling on the bottom stair of a staircase I once found so intimidating, and I understand now that the deepest justice was never going to come from exposing her in front of a room full of relatives, the way she had once exposed me. It came from something quieter, a truth finally spoken aloud, a family slowly, imperfectly, learning to hold each other, without cruelty as the language in between. That is the only kind of victory I have ever wanted. The kind that lets everyone eventually come home.